And Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday from Philadelphia. We've got a very special show for you today at Nimitz Encounters Superpanel with a huge selection of guests, all of them special in their own way. Let me bring on my co-host, Chant to do the honors of introducing our fantastic panel for today.
Thank you, Frank. How are you doing today?
Doing just well. Ready to go. We're ready for this one.
Yep. We have a great mega panel regarding the USS Princeton and the USS Nimitz. I did want to mention I already interviewed Dave Beatty, and that will be a special report, which will be a part 2 to this. And I'm going to go ahead and start introducing our guests onto our panel now. Rich Hoffman. He has been a defense contractor for over 20 years, working primarily for the Army Material Command HQ with a variety of companies. Currently, Mr. Hoffman is an enterprise architect working at Redstone Arsenal and the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. He has 54 years experience in investigations, a research investigation STAR team manager, and director of strategic projects, as well as state director in MUFON and other organizations. He is on the board of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, also known as the SCU. We have Gary P. Voorhis. His background is in mechanical engineering and working as an electronic and RF technician. He was a fire control man and Aegis computer CEC technician in the United States Navy. His responsibilities included operating, maintaining, and repairing various computers in support of the launching of the Aegis weapons system and non-Aegis sensor systems for the purpose of testing and evaluating experimental upgrades. During his time on the USS Princeton, he was tasked with the security and invention of top secret and classified materials, including being trained to operate the WASP military recon UAV for the Pacific Fleet during Operation Enduring Freedom. On the 14th of November 2004, he was an eyewitness to the USS Nimitz tic-tac event and its Aegis. Sorry, I didn't mean to mispronounce that. Thank you very much for correcting me on that. P.J. Hughes served in the Navy as an aviation's electronics technician, primarily on the E2C Hawkeye, E2C Hawkeye, and C2A Greyhound airframes. He left Navy in December 2010 as a first-class petty officer to work on the civilian side of military aviation, employed as a technical representative for the E2C and E2D Hawkeye. He spent his active duty time on both the East and West coasts, deploying in 2003, 04, 05, Hawkeye, and 2010. As an aviation electronics tech, he was responsible for the avionics and weapon systems on board the Hawkeye. These systems included AN/USG-3, Cooperative Engagement Capability, the APS-145 radar system, and various other communications, ComSec, and navigation equipment. In November 2004, Patrick was a second-class petty officer attached to VAW-117, Carrier Airborne Early Warning Squadron, the Wallbangers, and was the squadron on board the Nimitz conducting air wing and battle group exercises. While he did not directly witness a tic-tac anomaly, he adds to the events that November when he describes how 2 USAF officers, along with his commanding officer, confiscated his classified recordings from an E2C Hawkeye that witnessed the tic-tac. PJ is also privileged to share the events described to him by a close friend and another Navy sailor who was airborne in the Hawkeye and witnessed a tic-tac form up with the E2C during flight. We'll hear a little bit more about that from PJ. Talking points, Jason Turner. Jason was stationed on board the USS Princeton from 2001 to 2005. He worked in supply and changed jobs in hospital corpsman in his third year of active duty. Since then, he has completed 2 additional deployments to Iraq, where he worked as a Customs and Border Patrol agent and a prison guard. He was an eyewitness to the tic-tac event and was able to view the original unedited version of the FLIR video from SSES, which is the ship signal exploitation space following the initial contact. Kevin Day, a retired United States Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer, a former operations specialist and Top Gun Air Intercept Controller with more than 20 years experience in strike group air defense, including wartime operations. An expert operator in the highly advanced Spy-1 radar system with years of service on board Aegis-equipped ships, including Vincennes, Chosen, and Princeton. Kevin has logged hundreds of air-to intercepts of suspect aircraft in both training and wartime operations. It was Kevin's team in Princeton's Combat Information Center that has discovered the fleets of anomalous air contacts. Welcome, everybody, to the show.
And bring in Rich as well.
Yes, I did actually read Rich's bio.
Sorry about that.
I sure did. Welcome, everybody, to the show.
Thank you, Chanta. This is Kevin. Great to be here with you all.
Thanks,
Hello,
Kevin.
shipmates.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having us on. This is Gary.
Hey, Gary.
This is Rich. Obviously, I'm glad to be on.
Hey, Rich.
Hey, Rich. Yep, Rich has been on many panels that we've had. How has the experience been for you all since the Nimitz case has gone public? I wanted to start with you, Gary. How has the experience been for you since the Nimitz case has gone public?
First off, it was primarily completely positive. I've been able to get in touch with a lot of my old shipmates. You know, it's pretty much blown up at this point, mainstream on History Channel, and hell, even the news. So it's just kind of vindicating for me. Other than that, I just, I'm glad that I was able to, back up my shipmates and, let everybody know that these events do occur on a regular basis, and, we need to really find out what they are.
And for you, Jason, how's the experience been for you since the Nimitz case has gone public?
It's been quite interesting. A lot of, I'll piggyback on what Gary said, is vindication, and I think we're all thankful that it's finally come out and we're able to talk about it openly without being looked upon as what are you talking about? But yeah, it's been good. It's been positive, and I'm thankful that we finally all are able to get here and talk about it.
How about for you, PJ?
Same as the other guys. It's been pretty positive most of the part. And like Gary, I've gotten a lot of guys I was stationed with back. And it's been nice to kind of fill in the gaps in my memory with Stein. It's been nice to meet the guys from Princeton. We've formed a tight little group, and it's good that this is all getting out into the mainstream.
We have Kevin Day with us. Kevin, how has it been for you since the Nimitz case has gone public personally?
It's been absolutely amazing experience. I can't even believe that this is happening, Chant. Probably the best part for me is reuniting with my former shipmates and a lot of the new friends that I've met since this has all come out publicly. It's just an amazing thing that we're witnessing, and what I want people to know is this really did happen. These things were really real. And
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Yeah, Rich, I wanted to ask you something, and that was the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, the SCU. They did a special report on the Nimitz case. Can you please share a little bit about that report?
Sure. Well, let me give you a little bit of insight on how we even got involved in the first place. Robert Powell happened to be reading the Fighter Sweep article that was going back to, I think, 2015 or something like that, and managed to look into that case. There were a lot of names that were on it, and of course, we've been investigating UFOs for a very long time. I've been at it for 55 years, and so it's been quite a ride. But anyway, nevertheless, Robert took it upon himself and started to look into it and document it. And then from that, he started reaching out. Kevin, he reached out to you in a January time frame, if I'm not mistaken, for an interview. And I think you were one of the first ones that we actually talked with. And then we were all doing our own research in terms of trying to find out how we can get a hold of crew members, because that was important. And I happened to come across a Facebook page that was dedicated to it, and I started talking with Kevin and a number of others that were, we were trying to find out what we could, and it was great that they had done that in a Facebook forum, because it allowed us to be able to, try to reach out and start to get their story. which was very critical. And so we started collecting all the information we could get, and then over a period of time, we started to assemble a report that involved. There were three primary authors with that. Robert Powell wrote the first, actually the report, and then we have a whole bunch of appendices that are attached to it, and that was done by Larry Gates, who did the work on the video. And then you also have Peter Reale that was doing who did the physics. And then I took several sections because I work in the DoD and I could get information about a lot of the equipment aboard the carrier group, if you would, and started collecting that kind of technical data on it, as well as trying to put together like a glossary and then that type of thing. So we all kind of like pitched in, and there were a whole bunch of others, believe it or not, that did some renderings as well. But over a period of time, it took us about 2 years to assemble this 270-page report. And what the important point was for us, and this is why this particular case is so very important, is that, and I mean, mind you, there's the tic-tac in this thing doesn't perform any different than what I experienced with UFOs back in 55 years ago. Meaning they could go from a standstill to instantaneous acceleration. They could go vertical. They could go and do all these types of things. They did it without sound. They did it without all that other stuff. And we've occasionally had radar contacts and radar tracks that are out there that on these objects doing incredible maneuvers as well. But what we'd never have had was the sheer amount of involvement and data from current technologies like we are now. And so in the SCU's perspective, you don't just dismiss these cases and not spend time on them. You spend years analyzing this data and trying to get it. And that's pretty much what we've done. And so that's pretty much it, Chant. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know these guys, and they're all incredible. And one other thing I just want to mention, and this is the important thing, so many UFO cases that I've looked into over the period of years that I've been doing this and investigating thousands of cases, it's a life-altering event when you have this experience of seeing these kind of objects. It really does. It changes your life, your perspective of life. I know that this group has grown closer, which is very, very important. And at the same time, they're all starting to remember other things, or making corrections to their initial testimonies, and that's okay. I want to reassure them that it's okay. Like, for example, we thought that this was the COM2X. Well, it was a TTSA. That was an activity before the COM2X. So, I mean, there's those details in our report that are still changing, and it's because the story keeps changing, but it comes about in the sense that these people are all now getting together and, oh yeah, this is what happened. Oh yeah, that's right. And they start to have those memories come back to them. And so that's very critical. And I just want to applaud them for keeping and hanging in there. And they are an incredible group of people that have helped the entire phenomena in ways that I can't even begin to express. I've been at this for a long time, and I've been waiting for something like this to happen, and it did, and it's altered my life now.
So, Rich, real quick, would you regard this case as an all-time top 10 case?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, we've had other cases that are pretty dynamic. If you took a look at the Iranian case, that involved two F-4s that were scrambled out of Tehran. That had all kinds of data with it as well. You've had other incredible cases over nuclear silos, which we all saw on Unidentified that were talked about. But I mean, the credibility of all these guys, the credibility of all the witnesses, the incredible amount of technology that was involved, the Aegis system and the capability of the CEC and all that stuff. It's absolutely incredible. So, yeah, I would, Frank.
Yep, I would agree with that, most definitely. And obviously for the guys, it's a top all-time one case, I would suspect. But Kevin, let's get over to you. You were manning the radar on the Princeton, and for a long time, people who've been following the UFO field have always heard skeptics say, well, where's the physical evidence? Where's the physical evidence? radar is physical evidence. And, you gathered that when you were on the Princeton. And tell us a little bit about, if you could, it might be a little tough on short notice, but tell us a little bit about just basically how radar works and why it is such strong evidence that something was actually there, that you were tracking a real object flying around and performing all these otherworldly maneuvers.
Yeah, and just a little background on that first, and we'll get into some of the details of the radar, and Gary can help me on this too. We'll keep this all at the unclassified level, of course.
Sure.
It was right around the 10th of November in the Navy. So it was kind of a trip down memory lane for me. I was doing a lot of reminiscing. I went up to combat and I noticed these really weird contacts on the radar. And what I mean by that, they were off San Clemente Island. I believe there were 6 of them at a time in a group, in a formation, if you will. And they were at 28,000 feet going 100 knots, which in itself is very strange. Never seen anything like that. And everyone in combat was looking around.
It was pretty odd. I know we were all looking at them like, what the heck could be in the air just doing 100 knots? I mean, without falling out of the sky.
Absolutely, Gary. And, it didn't conform to anything known. I mean, they weren't obviously civilian airliners. They weren't helicopters. Was not ice particles from space. It wasn't a flock of geese. It was none of those things. So, I wasn't concerned that they were a threat at all because they weren't threatening in any way. They just happened to be in the space. In fact, they could have been something completely unrelated to what we were doing, totally civilian oriented, and we had no business even messing with them. In fact, that was my intention. Although I wanted to intercept them because I'm kind of a type A guy that way, especially it was going to be my last underway. We were going to do an air defense exercise on the 14th. So I was biding my time, and we continued to track these things, and they appeared in groups between 5 and 10 over a couple of days. So Captain Smith comes down to combat and I say, hey, sir, we're going to launch a bunch of aircraft off the aircraft carrier to do this air defense exercise that we call an 8X. And I strongly recommend that we intercept one of these guys that we're seeing out here, because if we don't, and there's an air-to-air mishap of some kind, somebody is going to ask us why we were so damn curious about it. He said, you know what, Senior Chief, you're right. Go find one of them. So that's exactly what we did. We went and found one of them, and that puppy dropped out of the sky from 28,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean in less than 1 second. And from that moment, probably changed the course of history.
And you ballparked the speed from going from 28,000 feet down to basically ocean level. What kind of speed did you come up with?
It tracks out to about 22,000 miles per hour. And by the way, the current airspeed record is about 10% of that, 2,200 miles per hour. So whatever this thing was, totally kicked our butts, if you will.
And Gary, you were jumping in a little bit there. Why don't you follow up on what Kevin was talking about?
And then one of the common questions that I've had before that I kind of wanted to clear up is that when objects do this and they're just reactionary and they're in the way that they react to us, and they're not actually pursuing us or engaging us with like active radar, they're not actually considered a current threat that we would go and engage. Because a lot of people are like, why didn't we shoot them down? Why didn't you chase after them? Why didn't you try to get them? Well, they don't pose a threat. So when you have rules of engagement, you generally can't fire upon unless, so they fire upon you, or they have an active lock that's going to be, an active lock, meaning their radar to locate you, to shoot them, let you, or something of that nature.
And now I've seen video.
Point, Gary. As a matter of fact, if I could describe the behavior of these things.
Yes, go ahead, please.
They behave like some super capable flock of birds, if you will, like they just wanted to be left alone, and want nothing to do with us. When Commander Fravor did his now famous intercept, that object he pursued down to the surface of the water, when he left the scene there, that object popped back out from the surface of the water to 28,000 feet and continued tracking south at 100 knots as if nothing fun had just happened at all. It just wanted to be left alone. And this whole notion of this thing seeming like a migrating whatever is now turned into a proposed expedition in November of 2020. there's a group of us, some distinguished physicists and scientists, and I'm probably the most uneducated one there in the group so far. But we're proposing to anchor off San Clemente Island, and since now we know when to expect these things in the sky, because we think they're related to whale migration, if you will. Okay. The whales migrate from Catalina down to Guadalupe Island every November. And it's just a hunch, but we're going to go out there, we're going to listen to hydrophones, we're going to watch on night vision, and we're going to try to correlate whale songs with the appearance of UAP. We're probably wrong, but just imagine if we're right.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll be a great trip regardless.
So this is Rich, one of the initial things about the frothing of the water where the tic-tac was above it was that a lot of people were speculating initially that it was probably a whale. So with you now injecting the fact that there's a relationship or correlation maybe between whales and stuff like that, or whale migrations, that's kind of an interesting correlation. I'd like to see that. But especially when we have objects all over, the ocean. One of the questions that I had, and I don't know where we lost the bubble on it, but I know that when we did our calculations in SCU, we were going and doing a lot of that from 80,000 feet down to 28,000 feet. And I don't know if that was because the story changed or what. Originally, I didn't hear the 28,000 feet being discussed. I always thought that we were measuring the 0.78 seconds as being from an 80,000 foot drop. But somehow we got that, I think, wrong. So going back to that, our calculations are a little bit more on speed because we did an 80,000 to a 20,000 foot drop, and it came up a little bit different. But anyway, I just wanted to check with you on that, or comment on that if I could. So.
Yeah, it was the perspective of the different watchstanders. Theater, ballistic missile defense watchstanders tend to watch real high in the sky, real high altitudes. And that was just not my situational awareness at all. I tend to focus right down, in the altitude blocks where aircraft tend to fly. So I wasn't aware myself of the 80,000. I wasn't aware that they were coming from space, 80,000 feet, until just about several months ago, which is a testimony.
Yeah, and just to jump in with a little factoid, the only man-made object I've ever seen associated with speeds that high, up in that 22,000 miles per hour range, has been a spacecraft in orbit. I don't know if, Rich, you've got any other details on anything along those lines. I think during re-entry, some of these objects, when they're coming back down to Earth, like the shuttle or some of the, the older craft, like the Apollo craft and all that, they might have hit, up in that 18,000 miles an hour range just after they come in from re-entry. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. No test vehicles that I'm aware of have ever hit those kind of speeds.
The other key thing there, Frank, is that, when we, and you're absolutely right. And so what happens, do we get like at 17,000 feet dropping down into, from space and coming into land, if you would, is you see all that heating up of the air, right?
Yep.
And so we don't have that with this tic-tac or these objects where they're moving at these speeds. And there's no indication of any heating whatsoever if you take a look at it. So, I mean, even on the FLIR, when the object shoots off to the left and stuff like that, you would see some indication of atmospheric heating. But so that means that they're not really impacted at all by the atmosphere.
Yeah, and that air friction really heats up. Again, another example from days gone by when they were getting up, breaking Mach 1 and all that back in the day. They knew that they couldn't use aluminum, which was a lighter metal than the steel that they used on something like the X-1, for example. They weren't able to use aluminum because aluminum just isn't strong enough. That air friction literally melts the metal, melts the aluminum. So that ruled that out as any kind of a structural metal for some of these more advanced crafts as we were building our faster planes, through the late 40s and into the 50s and where we're all at today. And the SR-71, as an example, uses titanium for on their bodies because, again, it's strong enough, it doesn't melt. So there's that.
Yeah, and they would even heat up tremendously. In fact, we saw repeatedly situations where when they land, and then they cool off, there's a difference or expansion that happens.
Yep.
In fact, they were leaking. They were leaking.
Yeah, they
fuel
leak. They leak like sieves, exactly. And then when they hit top speed, the metal expands and it closes off the leaking, all the leaking of the fuel.
Right.
Okay, so now Gary and Kevin, you actually were able to go on board. Were you both on the same ship and looking through a pair of heavy-duty mounted binoculars that were on the ship and actually saw the tic-tacs yourselves? Is that about right?
Yeah, that's correct. We were both able to, because we have access to, actually figure out just about where they were, and then basically go up and look in that general direction to see if we could see them. I got to see just basically small lights in the distance moving at weird, it's a little light show back and forth and doing its little dance back and forth. And I know Kevin, he was able to see some stuff, and then we have another shipmate that was just on TV that saw an entire fleet of them.
And looking through the binoculars, roughly was what you saw basically what the size of a bright star, that kind of size. Could you give our folks at home an idea of how big what you saw was through the view that you were able to get from the binoculars?
I went up to combat. It was the evening after the 14th Commander Fravors intercept, and of course now I'm convinced we intercepted UFOs, and I was like, hell yeah, I intercepted a UFO, my very last intercept in the Navy. But I wanted to see these things with my own eyes. So lo and behold, there was another group on the radar, and I just happened to pick the closest one. I quick like a bunny ran up to the up there on the bridge where the big eye binoculars are located. I was up on the starboard side, looked in that piece of sky, which is one of my skill sets. I often part of my job description is to be able to correlate visual reports with radar. So I'm absolutely convinced that what I saw in the sky was indeed the radar contact that was on the screen. And I have to tell you, all I saw was a boring white light. In fact, I was so disappointed, I went back down to combat and said, oh, man, I didn't do nothing.
Yeah, it was a bit anticlimactic, but it was exciting that we could
you saw it.
A physical object. This is Gary again, by the way.
Yep.
And it kind of like, you ever see one of those tap lights? Like you put somewhere and you tap, and it's got that kind of offset kind of glow, not quite a direct light or anything like that. That's kind of what it felt like at a distance, kind of like seeing a street light from 30 miles away.
Yeah, I didn't see any colors. All I saw was just a boring white light, kind of a glow actually.
I'd love the opportunity to hear from PJ Hughes and Jason Turner. If you all want to jump in on the discussion, that would be great, to share any of your experiences regarding the topic at hand.
Oh.
I think we lost you there.
Yeah, there is a microphone on mute. Go ahead.
I'll go ahead. This is Patrick. Unlike the other guys, I never actually saw the tic-tac. I never saw radar tracks. I never saw the video till it was released to the public and everybody else saw it. What I had to deal with was the day of Fravors' flight. We had a Hawkeye airborne, the same Hawkeye that Kevin took control of. And when that flight came back, Air Force officers who, as far as I know, hadn't been on the ship before that, appeared at my door with my commanding officer asking for our removable hard drives off that flight. So we had to open up the safe, give it to them. They took them, left. I never saw them again. Roger, who was one of my coworkers, is on that Hawkeye. Well, he signed an NDA. Can't tell me the majority of what they debriefed about or what they were talking about or what they saw. But what he did share was that the tic-tac did indeed form up with the Hawkeye for a very brief time and that they saw it. That's about all he was going to tell me.
Got it. Yeah, let me jump in here real quick with PJ. PJ, you said that the Air Force guys got onto the ship in fairly short order after the Hawkeye landed. Do you have a ballpark as to how quickly you saw those guys after the E-2 landed?
I mean, roughly, and I've kind of firmed up my timeline talking to somebody else actually in the last couple weeks. When the plane lands, we've got a series of checks and stuff that we do to get the plane ready to fly again before I end up taking all those classified hard drives out of the plane and going back downstairs into our shop. The overall process was probably about 20 minutes between me leaving the airplane, getting down to my shop, and maybe about another 10 minutes after that before they showed up at my door to grab the stuff. So probably about 30 minutes from when that plane landed till they were there to take the stuff.
So
go ahead, Rich.
This is Rich. I was just going to ask about that because I was always curious about the E-2C Hawkeye. So they didn't. Are you saying that they did pick up something and they did track something? Is that correct?
I don't know 100% sure.
Yeah.
I know the capability of that radar, and while it's nowhere near Spy 1 quality, I know where we had it tuned, and if it was as close to them as they say it was to see it, they were tracking it on radar. But more importantly, the data I believe they were actually after is tied into the CEC system and the ESM system that were priority on those missions at that time.
Okay. Yeah. I was always curious about that because I kept thinking, like, well, where is this Hawkeye that it was it so far away that it couldn't capture it? But, I mean, you'd think with the fact that its whole purpose is to be able to do this kind of surveillance and that it would have captured something.
It has to do with the differences between the Princeton's radar and the Hawkeye's radar. The Hawkeye's radar at that time was a search radar.
Okay.
It was not meant for fire control. It's a lot slower than Gary's radar.
Plus the fact that they have CEC on board, it would have been a blended view, so they wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between their own tracks and our tracks.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that helps because I never really could make or figure that one out. All right. Well, good. And then I guess what I'm curious about when this thing came back to the cap point, would it have been? Do you think that's when it would have? I mean, would it have seen it then, maybe, or is that because the object shot back at the cap point, which I thought was really curious, and a lot of us think that it's pretty curious. That it would know that, number one, and number two, be at the cap point, and then I would think that quite possibly that you would start to have a little bit more visibility of that thing as well. So just kind of curious.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about, how they were surprised about it, knowing where the cap point is. But my kind of point in that matter is if it's got this ridiculously advanced technology to be able to move around like it does, it's not too far-fetched to think that they could just listen to our encrypted transmissions without even trying.
Right.
Yeah. And just to explain for the folks at home who might not be that familiar with what you're talking about, basically the two jets flew out, intercepted the UFO. The UFO took off, and then they had a prearranged meeting point, the cap point, basically a rendezvous point, prearranged. And when they went there to sort of regroup, the UFO was waiting for them at that point. So yeah, that is a really interesting detail about this case, Rich.
Yeah, and basically, just so the audience understands completely, that cap point that we're calling it is actually combat air patrol points in the sky. They're kind of arbitrary, and we basically put them around the strike group towards the direction of any notional threat. And it's just a socialized point in the sky, classified point in the sky that only we know about, and it's kind of just a loiter. It's a loiter spot for the aircraft until they can get a vector or a mission assignment. And somehow that thing, because I'll never forget the words from the air intercept controller on person who said, "Hey, sir," he was talking to Commander Fravor on the air intercept control communications. He was like, "Hey, sir, you're not going to believe this, but that thing is now at your cap point." And it was just followed by a stunned silence because that cap point was 60 miles away from where he was. And it went there, I don't know how fast, but it was just that fast. As quickly as I said it, it was there.
Got it. And Jason, can you read me, Jason? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jason, you saw a unedited version of the FLIR video, and tell us a little bit about that and the circumstances under which you saw it.
Yeah, I was actually working in supply, and we basically we had an order to change out some of the pieces of the computers that we have up there. So I went in to the to CES, which is a ship signal exploitation space, and happened to look to the left, and there's this video rolling. It was the video. It was 7 to 10 minutes long, and a lot clearer than what you see now. Because now I think we have like a minute and a half of video, but it's real grainy, it's real fuzzy. It's hard to even read some of the numbers on there. But the original video was a lot cleaner, if you will.
Got it. And did you see anything on there that was interesting that is not in the video that we've all seen?
No, everything. I mean, other than like the protrusions that are coming out of the bottom of the tic-tac. I had recently saw a video where I think it was Commander Fravor was talking about it, where they would come out and they were bending back. I didn't see the bending backwards part of it, but that's really, I would say, insignificant. The fact that there were protrusions coming out from the bottom, kind of like, they would go down, but he said they were kind of like a L-shaped. I saw straight down, and but other than that, what you see on the video, there was a lot more to the video, as far as the movements, the erratic turning, going from one place to another, and Gary had mentioned it when we were out in Laughlin about how this thing would just go from point A to point B, like it would, or it may have been Gary or Kevin, but wherever it was, it made a decision to go from point A to point B. It went from the speed that it started to the speed that it needed to get there, and then stopped on a dime. And the maneuvers this thing was making was incredible.
With no sonic booms, just Kevin.
Yeah, well, the question I've got is, and I guess since you saw like a longer version,
correct,
and we're seeing a short version, typically like when the DoD releases stuff, they'll go and edit it, or they'll cut out like the metadata associated with it, or they'll there might be somebody that's talking and they mention a pilot's name or something of that nature. Is there any reason why we don't have the longer one, in your opinion, that would, that the other part was classified, or?
I'm not privy to that, so I really couldn't answer that. Maybe Kevin or Gary could, as to the reason why, but I wouldn't know that answer.
No, I was just kind of curious if you knew anything specific. I mean, like, go ahead. Anybody want to chime in?
This is Gary. If I had to guess, because of the extent of the capabilities of the craft, you were the physicist, right?
Yeah. Well, we've got a team of people. Yeah.
Now, the small thing you could speed, altitude, a lot of information. But if you actually got to see how this thing moved, then be able to actually figure out the numbers of and look at the way it was engineered and the way it was moving, it would have been a lot more data for you to crunch, and a lot more numbers and a lot more specifics on its actual capabilities with the full video rather than the small snippet. It's kind of like you're just going to wet your whistle. Yeah, it exists, and then stop.
Yeah, well, it certainly wet our whistle. I mean,
we're getting some breaking up here.
Point where we try to look at that and a lot of people asked about that at our conference we had as well.
Yeah, I think mostly it's just to just keep the full capabilities of the craft a secret.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is Jason again. From what I saw in there, I mean, like what you guys are talking about now, if you could actually see the full video when they were chasing this thing to intercept it, to cut, the way that it was cutting, and it was amazing. I mean, it was absolutely amazing to see something move like that when right here on Earth. It was insane.
Yeah, this is Kevin. If I had to speculate on an answer, and that's all I'm doing and speculating, is that video is in the same place with the radar data, whatever government silo that's fighting, I think. Because I'm guessing that the video movers strongly correlate with the radar maneuvers. This is my speculation.
Yep.
And PJ, they wanted that stuff pretty quick. They must have gotten word somehow that all this information was available, and they moved very, very rapidly to get it.
Well, with how fast they reacted, you also have to remember we were tracking these things for like over a week. I mean, it could have gotten to every portion of the entire government by the time we actually did the intercept.
Sure. Were you guys openly talking about it? I mean, would in other words, somebody listening in, like maybe your security officer or something like that, would have been overhearing it and saying, "Hey, we had something," or how do you think that word?
I don't even think it would be like that unofficial. I think it would just be completely reported up, and then as it got filtered through, just the people that were dealing with it would deal with it. Kick this over to ATIP, kick this over to and then they do go. Then they just start heading out and doing their thing.
And
you guys do incident reports or something like sit reps, don't you?
Well, Kevin, you had talked about at least considering doing an OpRep 3 report at one point. I remember you talking about that when you were on with us last time, but you decided not to do that.
Yeah, I went up to combat, and it was my feeling that Captain Smith was not going to release a message, but I was going to put one together anyway. So I went up to combat. The lead technician helped me. He had saved a copy of the radar data when he wasn't supposed to, I think. Anyway, we observed that, and that's how I know this maneuvers happened in 0.78 seconds, by the way. And also something else interesting happened. We record all of our external communications onto optical disc. Well, all those communications were gone. Nothing was there, and at that point, I just kind of threw up my hand.
I don't know if anybody can hear me, but I wanted to go ahead and ask a question. Frank, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, the question I have is, what is your everybody's take regarding the History Channel's Unidentified show, which I believe Kevin Day has been on? Anybody want to go ahead and pipe in on that?
Gary was on it too.
Yep.
Gary? Okay, wonderful.
I mean, this is Patrick, PJ.
Yeah.
I'll be perfectly honest with you. Other than watching Kevin and Gary's part, I haven't seen any of the show. I just watched it.
It's been good. It's been a really good show. I've been very pleased with it. Kevin, tell us a little bit about your experience appearing on the show.
I was so surprised I was so much a part of episode 3. I kind of figured I'd make like maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and the rest ended up on the cutting room floor. But it was, I live in a real small town. So it's hard to go into town now without people like pointing and stuff. My life has really changed because of that show. I can tell you that.
I don't think, unlike him, I get a little bit bigger town, but I live in Podunk. Other than people just saying, "Hey, I saw you on TV." That's about it. But I've been following it. I found Blue Book more entertaining, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the conclusion of this is. Whether it's going to be just mostly just publicity and them trying to make a buck off the stories. I wait to see some actual something happen from it, and then I'll be happy.
Hey, I'd like to, Chant, if I could, I'd like to speculate on something real quick.
Yes, please.
Quick. In 2004, before we went out to sea, and it was above my security clearance at the time, but apparently I just heard in the last couple of weeks or so that the Princeton had received a major firmware update to our SPY and CC system. And that kind of turned the light on for me because I'm thinking.
Kevin, none of that stuff is probably anything we should probably be talking about. You can just basically say that our systems were just they were state of the art at the time. They were an experimental baseline, and that's about all we can talk about the specifics on what was on the ship and what wasn't on the ship.
Yeah, this is Rich. I mean, basically, you guys come back and you get retrofitted and upgrade. There's always upgrades to equipment going on, even in the Army weapon systems that we have. So. It's no surprise that when you come back to port or something like that, you go through upgrades, and then they test the upgrades and exercises. But
at any rate, the larger point here, I think I'm trying to make is, I think that's the reason I was able to see these things suddenly. In my opinion, they probably had long been there, but I could now suddenly see them, and I also think it explains why there's so many reports now, because the whole fleet has possibly got this upgrade. Now we're sitting in the sky that we couldn't see before, and I think Big Navy was just as shocked as I was, and that explains people running out to the ships and gathering all this data as quickly as they did.
Yeah, this is Rich again. I want to inject and say the same kind of thing. I think with our increased capabilities of that we are now able, or even the equipment that we have on the Roosevelt was upgraded to the point where the capabilities of the radar is able to discern even better a lot of things that it might not have thought. So the equipment keeps getting better and better. I think we're able to catch these things now and distinguish them a lot better. The aircraft, certainly the F-18 Hornets have been Super Hornets have been upgraded with all kinds of advanced capabilities now. So I think that you're absolutely right. I think that it's a factor of the technology has now so vastly improved that we're able to now discern and separate out, these type of objects. And in the past we've had radar, we've had other kinds of things that have got these things, but even the radar has been not necessarily valuable or accurate all the time too. And the older radar, the older cases is what I'm talking about. But yeah. It is a factor, and it's very important. Did you guys experience anything else? I mean, you went from that TTSA, you went over to other exercises. You were probably deployed, but did you ever run across anything anywhere else or like this, or no?
Well, I haven't. I actually left the service pretty quickly after we got back. It was most underway with the but. Other than that, it's been. I did need to abridge something, and after we're done this topic, we need to talk about my original statements.
That would be great. You're welcome to talk about them now if you wish.
All right. So I've gotten in contact with one of the leading petty officers that was in charge of the sonar that day, and I was able to confirm that the Princeton itself never had any active on a submerged vehicle. When I was told about an active track on a submerged vehicle, it wasn't this particular sonar technician. It was a different technician, and he directly told me that we did have tracks, but he didn't specify whether it was the Princeton or the Nimitz or the submarine. So I've got no clue where that source was from, and that's what I've been trying very hard to track down myself. But that particular person is renaming, staying as the unnamed sonar technician due to the fact he doesn't want his name associated with this. But he, without a shadow of a doubt, he said two things. He said, A, he didn't have any active tracks the entire week on the Princeton itself, and B, if anybody told me that, they would have had to gotten a hold of somebody from the other ships on their own, because during their own duties on watch, they would have never actually been in contact with any of the other ships. So that's part of my story, that I'm actually trying to track the person that told me down, which I haven't been able to get a hold of yet. So that is the abridged version of the underwater tracks.
That's good, Gary. I'm glad you clarified that.
Understood. I did have a question from Earl Gray, who's the chief investigator for MUFON in Southern California chapter. He said this: Kevin Day wrote in his short story about the Nimitz affair that there were some weird effects that he noticed on the radar deck of the Princeton while they were tracking the tic-tac. I asked him about this. He thinks there's an intelligence from ET contact that is contagious, so to speak, contagious intelligence. And perhaps what he witnessed on the radar deck had something to do with this, that the crew was literally being changed psychologically and intelligence-wise by their contact with ET intelligence. Kevin, do you have any comments about that?
I do. Jacques Vallée and Dr. Eric Davis did a paper, and I forget the exact name of it. Someone help me out if you can remember. I think it's called the high strangeness incommensurability or something like that. And basically what it does is it outlines 6 different layers of phenomena that happens with UAP encounters. And a couple of those layers, I believe they're 4, 5, and 6. The 4th one is physical changes to people that encounter these things. The 5th one is psychological changes that happens to people. And then the very last one is social changes, which is what we're all observing happen right now. And I think there's something to it. It's been well documented that people that come in contact with this phenomenon, their life bifurcates, that changes them. And it's part of the mystery here. Why does that happen? I don't know. But I can tell you that it does. I was profoundly affected by this thing. We don't have enough time now to go into all of it, but at some later time, I'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm going to post a link to that paper in the chat so people want to take a closer look at it. It's available there.
I wanted to just talk about the topic of UFOs and consciousness just for a moment. And that's a hot topic that everybody's been talking about probably for, 50 or maybe 60 years now. Rich, do you have any comments regarding that topic? I know that you and Grant talked about it on another program, but do you have any comments regarding the scientific aspect of that, or is there any science to it whatsoever?
Well, I mean, consciousness study, people have a difficulty trying to even figure out what consciousness is. I mean, how do basic like cells and even if you get down to the quantum level, how does that work in terms of you having a conscious, and how do you interpret that? There's always been some types of, let's put it this way, post-experiencer kinds of effects with people. We've had that with reported cases as well. If you take a look at, if you want to accept that the abduction phenomena is indeed happening, you're talking about people being spoken with via telepathy. They're hearing the conversation in their head. You also have the situation where people are allegedly floating through buildings and various other things. Are they really doing that from a physical standpoint? There's the impact of the individual that is in the bed next to them, that is caught in some sort of like suspended whatever, So, I mean, the consciousness and how we interpret reality is definitely always going to be a factor in everything. And so, I mean, these guys are all witnessing this phenomena via their consciousness, And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, it's not something that we necessarily studied. We tended to look at the hard science behind it, if you would, the physics and stuff like that. But trying to explain this phenomena, and I know that Jacques Vallée wants to put it in the context of, for example, that it might be an interdimensional kind of thing, or it might be tied to consciousness. And Eric Davis, and there's a whole host of people like Gary Nolan are also looking into it. And I applaud them for doing it. That science, for that standpoint, has not yet come to grips with something. But again, I mean, from the standpoint of this particular phenomena, and how do you or separate this phenomena from just life in general? So was the object out there manipulating the consciousness of Fravor, or was it, how do you inject that? Was it impacting, Kevin Day? We don't have any way even to measure or identify that. It's usually just an experience that people talk about. Some people don't even talk about it because it's too weird, and it weirds out when you talk to somebody else about it because they're not as open about it. But I mean, these impacts or these experiences from the standpoint of the individual's psychological or how they, the impacts that they don't want to talk about in general in UFO cases. And,
Okay.
and we don't learn much.
Thank you for that, Rich. PJ, Gary, and Jason, did you experience any high strangeness after this event in your lives after having been exposed to it?
This is Jason. No, I didn't have anything beyond, just a normal life afterwards. And that's what I was sitting here thinking, like, if this does happen, maybe it doesn't affect people the same way, or, each individual person has their own experience.
Go ahead.
I know this is Gary. I know for me, I've had so much stuff happen that I don't know whether it was a UFO or just normal life experiences that have changed the way I've seen things in the world. But I've definitely had a dramatic change from before that day and today. But like I said, I don't know what to really attribute that to.
We do have a question from Shane Hurd, who is an investigator from the Phoenix MUFON chapter. And he asked if you're allowed to say, did you or have you ever experienced any kind of activity before or after the Nimitz incident? I think he means of some kind of anomalous event, maybe similar to what you all were exposed to. Can anyone give any input regarding that topic?
No, this is Gary. Mine's quick.
Yeah,
I've not.
I can. I had what I can only describe as daytime visions that helped me find a huge deposit of gold back here in the wilderness. I'm not a geologist. My family had that mine back there since the 1930s, and I became obsessed with this idea that I could find it, and
That's
I did.
awesome. That's
I
wonderful.
did. Although we're never going to mine it because it's in the wilderness, and we're not going to tear up the wilderness.
And we're not going to give your address out either.
Yeah, just
input regarding that topic. Does anybody have? Go ahead, Frank.
I just wanted to jump in and talk about how you guys went public with all this. What was that process, and how were you contacted and told that hey, we want to hear more about this? Was it Dave Beatty or?
No, I dropped a note on Robert Pell's YouTube video right after December 17th happened.
Okay.
And he contacted me, and that's how this whole thing started, at least for me personally.
Got it. Okay. And PJ?
I ran into Dave Beatty's initial version of the Nimitz Encounters on YouTube, and I had sent him an email based on that.
And Jason,
asked me if I wanted to be part of it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Jason, how did you get involved in all this more directly?
Mine was the same way. I saw the original version that David posted, and I sent him a letter and an email, and told him I was, I'd like to come out and talk about it and see where we go.
Yeah, since we're giving shout outs, shout out to Dave Beatty, because I tell you what, his video has really, really helped people come forward. And I don't know we'd all be sitting here right now without what he did. I really don't. And the other guy I'd like to give a shout out to is Dave Altman. He's the agent in Hollywood that's helping me out, because I started getting so many requests and stuff. I was just swamped.
Understood. Well, we appreciate you coming on today. No doubt about that. And
they're helping us.
I did want to mention that I did actually have the privilege and honor of interviewing Dave Beatty last week for about an hour and a half, and he did get to talk extensively about his Nimitz Encounter film and how it's actually changed over a period of time and the reasons why. He was very candid about that, and that is going to be a part 2 to this show that we will have. So in other words, when this show ends, we're actually going to go ahead and post that part 2, which is a special report regarding Dave Beatty. And Rich Hoffman, I was going to ask you, what was your response to Dave Beatty's Nimitz Encounter film? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my God, I loved it. I mean, we when we deal with cases, typically it's hard for us to have renderings, to where we can, have something the quality that he did in terms of the video to show, how did this actually happen? I mean, I worked with Dave, and I'm sure that other guys, and we're all working with him to try to get this as precise as possible. And that's the thing I appreciated about Dave, is that he was not, let me just make a picture and let me just do this and put this story together. He really tried to get every little detail and every little nuance and it accurate. And that was fabulous. And so we don't often have that. And then usually what happens is when Hollywood or something like that goes out and tries to tell a story on shows, they do an abysmal job of making the renderings, and they add now additional problematic data where they don't do it accurately. And now everybody that sees the video thinks that that's the way UFOs operate, or that that's the way that they look, and it's totally wrong. And they get it wrong periodically. And so I appreciate Dave to the nth degree.
And PJ, you had mentioned a interesting new witness that you wanted to share. So why don't you jump in and tell us all about that?
A little more than a week ago, Dave got an email he ended up forwarding to me. And I don't have permission to share the guy's name or anything,
Sure.
so I won't. But I've pretty much verified most of what he had to tell me. So I'm pretty sure he's a legitimate witness, but he's actually an operations specialist from the Nimitz, and he was telling Dave and I about a meeting that appeared at a place called Sims Hall, which is on the ASW base in San Diego, where he stated the pilots, some people from the Princeton, and some other people were all there, and they were told, and I'm going to quote his line, "Hey, we don't know what that was, but just in case, you should not talk about it." And like I said, that's the first we'd heard about any meeting or anything taking place after the ships pulled back in. And I haven't been able to verify who's actually been there, but the rest of the guys were checked out.
If it's the same meeting he's talking about, I was there.
And that's another verification we got.
Yeah.
But that also tells us that Nimitz was, like I said, he was. I'm not going to share what he was tracking it on, but they were tracking it on the Nimitz's own radar, along with all the data links, which the Princeton and the Hawkeye would have been sharing anyways.
Yeah. Kevin, if you can tell us who put the meeting together, was that something that came from above down, or was that something that kind of had sort of a groundswell amongst you guys doing your jobs on the ship?
We were going to do the meeting anyway, because we often do post meetings after exercises to do go over lessons learned and come up with ideas for better stuff later. And because this happened, it became a topic of the conversation while we were there. We would have had the meeting anyway. It's standard routine for us.
Mm-hmm. And
for the air defense teams.
Yeah, what was the result of the meeting?
Wow. I think people, even then in that room, no one really understood what we had all just witnessed. I mean, we didn't even know how to make sense of it at the time.
I had a question from a high-profile person in the UFO community who had asked me to ask you all a question. Actually, he sent a series of questions, but I'll go ahead and ask one of them now. I'm going to start off with Rich Hoffman to see if he knows about this topic that this well-known person wanted to ask. He asked, are you aware of the huge database of pilot sightings built up over several decades by Dr. Richard Haynes at NASA? Rich.
Oh, sure. I mean, Dr. Haynes did an incredible job of collecting this in NARCAP. They're talking about this from the context of, this threat, if you would, the fact that we have objects that were out there that were, getting up in our exercises, and we have objects that are doing this or that. Dr. Haynes has done an incredible job for decades of documenting all the commercial pilots kinds of things that come forward. And his big thing was getting those reports where there's a safety or a flight safety issue. In 2013, for example, I had a case where a 4-foot object that was was basically like a disc-shaped object that came underneath the wing of an aircraft, like a Cessna, and it's right underneath its wingtip as it's flying along. Well, these are concerns, from a flight safety standpoint, you've got to be concerned about it. And at the same time, if you look at the East Coast encounter, if you're flying at, like, say, 28,000 feet or something like that, and you've got this object that's whizzing by that, you could have hit, that's a big concern. So, I mean, yeah, NARCAP and Dick Haynes, in fact, we contacted him a lot about even the Aguadilla case that we studied.
Yeah, I just wanted to read a little bit about his bio just so folks know I'm talking about. And then also I included a link into the chat area so folks can actually click on that and see a little bit about Dr. Richard Haynes. He was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and he worked at NASA from 67 to 86 as a research scientist in numerous astronautical topics and aeronautical as well. And he retired from the government service in 88. And he also taught at San Jose State University as associate professor of psychology and so on. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is he has an extensive article that is titled A Review of Selected Sightings from Aircraft from 73 to 78. And then another one that he has is a review of selected aerial phenomenon sightings from aircraft from 1942 to 1952. And then there's many, but he has quite lengthy articles dedicated to the topics that we're talking about here. It sounds like he's dedicated quite a bit of his life to this topic, which is quite interesting. The other
yeah, and let me jump in here
ahead.
and make one quick point about air safety in general. Okay. And folks who are in the business are fanatics about safety. It's part of the reason why air travel is so safe. But on the civilian commercial side, literally everything imaginable that could be a threat is regarded as a threat. Birds. I think Sully Sullenberger would agree that birds can be a potential hazard for air travel. Weather, obviously. Any kind of a pilot distraction is categorized in the threat error management protocols as a potential threat to air safety. So literally anything and everything could be, and certainly UFOs, even though they're not specifically mentioned, could easily be just by providing a distraction to a pilot. Could be a potential risk. So the folks who are in that business take air safety very seriously, and I'm sure the same applies over in terms of the military as well.
Hey, Chant,
go ahead, please talk. Please, by all means. Yeah.
The San Clemente expedition that's now just getting worked and getting proposed, if there's anyone out there listening that wants more information on that, or maybe even potentially wants to help us fund it, please contact Chant Hannah, and she'll contact me, and we'll make that happen.
Absolutely. And you can contact me at chanthannah@hotmail.com. And can you just repeat that one more time so people can hear what you just said in case they missed it?
Yeah, we're proposing to do an expedition. We're going to anchor off San Clemente Island off the coast of San Diego. And because we know where these UAP are coming from, where they're going to, and also what time of the year they're doing it, we think it's based on the migration of whales. We're going to go out there and just see if it happens. We're going to listen to the water. We're going to listen for whale songs, and we're going to try to correlate anything we see in the sky with the whale songs.
That's fantastic.
It's an all-volunteer crew. It's not a profit-making thing. It's an expedition of discovery only.
That definitely sounds like something that's worth contributing to. And you're welcome to talk about that topic at any time on our show at length if you want to. And we're not in any rush. We're here for you all today. So interrupt us at any time and talk about any topics you feel are relevant. The other question that this gentleman wanted to ask you all is, he had a few, but one of them is, well, any advanced technology of unknown origin is a potential threat. Do you think the UAPs you encountered are a threat at this time? Can anyone chime in on that topic?
This is Kevin. I think they're a threat from this one perspective, and that's really as much as I'll say about it. What if the 2004 encounter happened off the coast of fill-in-the-blank country when there are hostilities, and I do have missiles to shoot? What happens for an overreactive pilot that says, oh my God, I'm being engaged, I'm being engaged, like Commander Fravor did, only this time they actually shoot a missile? Damn, man, we could start a war without even trying to. And that threat, right there is a threat. The Navy needs to stand up and start training the watchstanders and the pilots, and there's stuff in our skies and we don't know what the hell it is.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's a good segue to a topic that seems to be hitting the news recently. And I'd like everybody's input on that, is that it seems like it's become more normal, so to speak, for pilots to be able to come forward and talk about anomalous objects in the sky. Is that true? Can anybody give input on that topic?
I mean, me personally, I think it's honestly all a tactic to just kind of desensitize the public to it and normalize it so that it's just not a big deal anymore. Just a kind of a different way of suppressing it.
Do you expect other pilots and support crew to come forward in the future? Anyone? Regarding anomalous objects in the sky or coming out of the ocean?
I think even on the this is Jason, but on the commercial side or private pilots, I think a lot of people are doing it. There's the stigma is starting to leave that's associated with it. So I think the more that we talk about it, the more that it becomes relevant to everyday flight operations. I think we will see a lot more people coming forward, especially on the private side and more so on the commercial side.
Rich, go ahead, please.
No, this is Rich. I just wanted to say one thing that, in my decades of this thing, it's only just within this recent announcement about the Roosevelt and stuff like that you've ever seen active duty military who have come forward with a story. We typically get retirees. In fact, I'm going to be giving a presentation on UFOs here in Huntsville to a group of Vietnam veterans. And typically, like when you give these lectures, you talk to people, they're willing to talk about it after the fact. They're out of service. They can talk about it. No, I saw something back in one, and that's okay. It's rare that you get somebody that's still active duty and wearing the green suit that can come forward publicly and say that they saw an object that they couldn't identify, that it outmaneuvered them, and that was more of a UFO. So this is a huge, huge change, and I'm just thrilled to death the fact that now you got that stigma that's going away, which would allow for conversations to happen, and now for scientists to get engaged and feel like they can come out and talk about it without being laughed at. And so this is a huge change.
And
we do
Rich,
have scientists.
Yeah,
Frank,
no,
I just wanted to.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to make a point, and that is that we have Kevin Knuth and Gary Nolan who are willing to come out publicly and talk about the topic of ufology. Rich, how do you feel about that? Could you please touch on that just a little bit more?
Well, no, I'm thrilled to death. I met with Kevin Knuth, and he also brought with him Dr. Matthew Sudeikis, who's like a very knowledgeable individual and a professor at the same school that he is that does dark energy and dark matter studies. And when I met with Dr. Knuth, he was presenting at the SU conference we had. This was about the week before that the guys got together in Nevada, but we were hoping that they could all come, by the way. But anyway, the situation was that he said it's still a challenge. In fact, Dr. Matthew Sudeikis said he's willing to join SCU possibly after he graduates from some sort of degree he had to wait until he got his what do they call that when you have your tenure? Okay.
Tenure, yeah, there you go. Okay.
And so after he gets his tenure, that he's willing to then do that because again, the stigma. You get what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
Well,
yep.
So I mean, and that's got to change. And I guess cases like this, and the fact that it's now coming out and being openly discussed, is now allowing them to have those conversations, and it not being laughed at. That they can talk about it, and that's going to be the change that's going on, even where I work in the DoD and stuff like that. I got more people coming up and talking to me about UFOs. Of course, my whole cube is decked out in UFO paraphernalia, but I mean, more and more people are coming forward, and that's great. We want that.
And what I was going to ask you, Rich, and really anybody who wants to respond, it's pretty obvious that with Graves and Aucoin, the two pilots in the Roosevelt case coming forward while still on active duty, they're getting the okay internally to do that. They're not just doing it on their own.
Yeah, well, and that's made me speculate. I'm sure that the other guys in the Navy would probably say the same thing, but it's like usually like announcements like this have got to go to the Public Affairs Office, and the Public Affairs Office has got to approve you going on TV and talking about something like this. And I don't know if that coordination happened, or somehow they got that approved. I'd love to know the backstory to that, but anyway, it's great that you've got two active duty coming forward, and more power to them. And I hope more the merrier.
Rich, I had a question for Rich, and that is, can you envision a full congressional hearing specifically for military pilots who have had UAP encounters, or possibly other personnel on the ground? Or can you touch on that topic?
Well, sure. Lou and them have been meeting with, and Chris Mellon have been pushing for that kind of thing to happen. They've been working with, and they got Senator Warner out of Virginia, and I think that they met with a couple other senators. And I think that with the fact that these gentlemen are all coming forward, it lends that conversation and credence. And the intelligence subcommittees are probably having conversations about it, and I think that's going to make a big change. And so, I wouldn't be surprised that we're going to see congressional hearings. When they're done talking about other things, of course, but we'll see that happen, and that evidence being brought forward.
And for the guys here, the Navy is really taking the lead on this particular issue. And as former Navy guys, are you guys taking any sense of pride in that the Navy is kind of leading the way on all this?
Kevin Day sure is. I'll tell you that. I am so damn proud of my Navy right now. I could hug it.
No, I'm still just trying to figure out why we have other branches.
I love it. I'm sorry, I work for the Army.
The advanced Marines. All right, Roger.
Okay, well, I have a family full of Army people, just so everybody knows. I had another question. That is from that individual. This is the last question he has for you all. He said, I know this is a bit sensitive, so let me ask this way. Are you comfortable with the explanation these UAPs being reported are controlled by non-human intelligence from elsewhere, assuming that's true? Again, can you envision are you comfortable with the explanation these UAPs being reported are controlled by non-human intelligence from elsewhere? Can anyone chime in on that topic?
Kevin, this is Kevin. Okay, now you said if it's true, right?
Yep.
If it's true, I don't think it matters what I think about it, because it is what it is. It doesn't really care what I think.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, I'm not convinced that's what's happening. My mind is open on that question.
Okay, why?
Because I'm still waiting for evidence, like a lot of other people. Faith is fine and faith is good, but it can't be the only thing. You should have some evidence to go along with your faith, I have to think.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question that some might feel is outrageous or not correct, but I'll ask it anyway. Is it possible that the craft, if it was that you all saw, was one of ours?
This is PJ.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually lean on the side of fence that it's not necessarily our technology. I hope it's ours. But that it's earthbound technology versus off-world technology. But if it turns out to be something from outer space or from another planet, I'm equally happy to see that too.
And this is Gary. I lean towards our own tech for now. And I say that just because, being in the service at the time, 15 years ago, I've seen the emergence of the tech that we're using today as commonplace would be science fiction just 15 years ago, and so, just because we can't imagine how it works right now doesn't mean that we didn't already develop it. And then on top of that, if it's not, and if this is non-Earth based tech, I honestly don't care. I just want to know how it works.
Okay, so is it true to say, because I've heard this topic bounced around and I don't know the accuracy of it, and that is that the military is always supposedly 20 years ahead in the technology compared to the public sector. Is that true?
I believe so. As I know, one of the small crafts is now not classified, the UAV Wasp that we were using as a aerial reconnaissance vehicle for VBSS. It's vertical. It's basically us boarding other ships during the Gulf War, and we were using it to reconnaissance those other ships. I mean, that was at least 15 years old before I even saw it on. I saw it on a TV show on the Discovery Channel. So, I mean, and I could say without a shadow of a doubt, at least 15 years ahead of what we got now, probably a whole lot more when it comes to advanced tech.
Hey, this is Jason. And what I wanted to add to that was with the advances of AI and supercomputers that we have that we've been working on, you say that it was like it was thinking on its own. This is what AI does. And so I would also lean toward it's ours. I would hope it's ours, but if it's not, whose is it? And what is the reasoning behind it? What are we doing with it? What are they doing with it? So I like to look at the supercomputer side of things and think about it that way, that it can do things on its own.
Yeah, I mean, we've already had scientists that shut down AIs because they weren't happy with what direction they were going in.
I mean, this is PJ. This is going back probably almost 10 years ago. The stuff we have is ridiculous. I mean, we have planes that have AI that will land themselves on a carrier. It's limited on AI technology, but it's there. The stuff that we can do and some of it we can't talk about is remarkable. So yeah, we're ahead.
And not to leave the UFO community behind, but I mean, if UFOs do exist, that means that we probably did have a craft that was down like in Roswell or even before that. And if we had that tech, I mean, who says we haven't tried to reverse engineer it? And if that's true, I mean, I have too many theories of if that's true, and we could talk about all of them. But since this is a UFO chat, we might as well talk about, give the sci-fi geeks a little bit too, even though we do favor.
Well, I will say this: the cases that go back in the day that really have a lot of similar characteristics. I think Rich will back me up on this. The hypersonic speeds, the maneuverability, stopping on a dime, going straight up and down, that type of thing. Those kind of cases go back, into the late 40s and early 50s, and I don't think we had that kind of tech. It gets a little hazier, it gets a little trickier with more contemporary cases. But those cases from way back when are the ones that really got everybody excited, including government folks. And it does get trickier these days in terms of determining whether it's our tech, have we got this, or is it possibly ET. But those cases have been in the books for a long, long time. And everything that you guys have said is, of course, unique to your stories. But by the same token, we've heard a lot of these things in cases gone by. And Rich, I think you probably backed me up on that pretty effectively.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say it. I'm chomping at the bit. To me, it's like one of those things when I look at those cases that are in the past. To me, from the standpoint of the physics or the maneuverability of the objects and the fact that they're not impacted by inertia and the size of UFOs that has varied over the period of history, and to me it's one of those things where it's like there's always been a phenomena here. Ultimately, what any military will do and if you go back to the Greeks doing the same thing, when you conquer another nation, you take over their technology, right? So anytime we get any pieces, parts, and stuff like that, we take it, we break it apart, we figure out what the metal is or whatever the material is, and we re-engineer it. I mean, we're doing that here at the base here at Missile Space Intelligence Center, where we get missiles or something like that. We'll tear it apart, figure out what it's about, and then see if we can't use that technology. So yes, we're going to do that. And, and we certainly have advanced from 1950, Frank. And I think we got a hell of a lot of smart people out there. So it's more than likely that we are building or coming very, very close to building craft that can do the tic-tac, And if you take a look at even just the patents that have come out just recently that we're aware of with Salvatore Pais, who's now filed, he's in the Navy, by the way, going back to the Navy, yay Navy, these patents that are out there for craft that look like that they could have the capabilities of a tic-tac. And so I don't think that we're that far away from getting it. It's just a matter of, working out, like, Frank, I mean, even if we wanted to go to Mars, we have to look at the logistics of moving humans. But now we're building drones that are self-autonomous, that are able to fly themselves, go on their own missions, if you would. So we're very close.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Oh, look at the nuclear drone they're about to send to Titan. I mean, that tech is amazing.
Yep.
I did have a question from Tom Whitmore. He's been actively involved in the UFO field since 1990, and he served on the board of MUFON Business Board since 94. He wanted to know if anybody can talk about this topic. Do you believe the U.S. Navy is capable of tracking UFOs underwater, USOs?
I actually do have an insight about that because I kind of picked the brain of a sonar technician. Now, granted, this was based off of technology from 15 years ago, but from what he said, unless they were dragging an array, which is basically a super long array that drags behind the ship, and so they have multiple, ways of tracking it. So they're getting multiple tracks in off of this array that they can't check. They can't do speed and they can't tell direction or anything without that array. So if it's just straight active sonar, all they can do is say, all right, it's there, and now it's there, and now it's there. They can't. It's not reliable enough for speed.
I did have another question that you all may have already answered in part, but I'm going to ask the question in its entirety from Dwight Hanna. And he's listening right now. He said, at any time did the carrier group become concerned about being attacked by an obvious superior entity? And if so, what level of readiness did they raise it to?
At no time did the air defense commander feel like we were under attack. And, oh, by the way, even if we had been attacked, we were screwed. There's nothing we could have done to defend ourselves against these things.
Yeah, really quickly, if I could jump in really quick. I've seen a number of videos taken on ships of Soviet fighters really buzzing our ships pretty closely. And obviously, we're not shooting at those guys. Can you tell us a little bit about what it would take to get the U.S. Navy to fire on you?
Probably them taking an active track on us. So basically, they would have to have their fire control radar on and have something targeted.
And also the geopolitical environment comes into play with that too, because it affects our rules of engagement.
Got it.
Hey, this is Rich. Just one question I had. In the red blue exercise, you had, of course, Lieutenant Colonel Kurth, who was with the Marines. He was positioned out in the water, and he actually got to see the bubbling water. He didn't see the tic-tac, but he saw the bubbling water, if you would, from something underneath the water. Was there another aircraft with him in that exercise, or was he just in a solo aircraft and he was going to be the red guy?
No, they were definitely two. It was a flight of two, if not four. Yeah.
Yeah.
They almost never fly alone. Always
I didn't think that they would. But anyway, I was just curious. We never hear about that, the fact that the other plane that might have been out there. All right, thank you.
Yes, I'd like to go ahead and ask some questions from the chat room. By the way, Gary, Kevin, PJ, or Jason, have you seen any questions in the chat room you'd like to address right now? Please.
I saw one that I was thinking of asking myself, and just as compared with the Navy being very open about all this in more recent days, the Air Force remaining completely silent. And I think that's interesting, and I wanted to get everybody's thoughts on that as well.
No, my thought is only that if they walked outside, it's not air conditioned, so that's about it.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I would. But
Okay,
this
go
is
ahead.
Rich. This is Rich. I'm aware from conversation with Lou that the Air Force is also looking into it now again in terms of getting reports. So they might be since they were like in Blue Book and the ramifications of Blue Book, they're probably playing it pretty low, low key, if you would. But anyway, they are supposed to be also engaged in trying to do this.
Okay.
We did have a question from De Silvia Custodio. He said, if they saw UFO movies detected by high definition radars or photos, and if they have not seen it, if they know the existence of movies from these high definition UFOs.
Well, there's no movies from radar data. The only data that you're going to get for like it would be kind of a movie is the CEC data can be extrapolated to a 3D picture, but it would have to be put the data set would have to be applied through a different program. It wouldn't be just through the CEC that you'd be able to see this stuff, because all it does is just share the data to everybody in the battle group.
Okay, there is a question that you may not be able to answer, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. What, if any, parties confiscated information regarding the incidents from the ship, government agency, and/or departments or any organization of any kind? I hear silence.
Say that one more time.
Okay, sure. What, if any, parties confiscated information regarding the incident from the ship, government agencies, or other departments? In other words, if there's any information that was confiscated from the ship regarding the event that you all witnessed, who did that?
Well, I can't speak for the guys who took Gary's stuff, but guys who took my stuff were wearing U.S. Air Force flight suits.
The guys that came and took our stuff, I only saw them getting on and off the helicopters. So, and they didn't really have. I honestly, they were so plain dressed. I don't even exactly remember what they were wearing. I just remember they just had normal civilian clothes on.
The part two of that question is they want to know what information was acquired.
On my ship, it would have been all the Spy 1 Bravo data and all the data recordings, plus anything that was recorded from any of the consoles in combat.
It looks like we're nearing the end of our show here. I wanted to ask Frank if there's any other questions he had left so that I can go ahead and wrap it up.
Oh, I could keep going for quite a while, but I think this is a good spot to end. We got an hour and a half in, and I think we had a great show. I really do.
I wanted the opportunity to go ahead and thank everybody for having been on our show. We have Gary Voorhis on with us today, Kevin Day, PJ Hughes, Jason Turner, and Rich Hoffman. Thank you very much for having been on our show today. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
having us.
Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Let's do it again, Chant.
One last
Absolutely.
thing, Frank. I wanted to go ahead and ask our guests this. We will be having a mega panel. We'll be out of event on July 7th regarding the History Channel's Unidentified series, and we're going to be doing a review of all of those shows. Would you all like to join us for that panel? That will be on July 7th at Sunday at noon, West Coast time.
That I won't be able to. I'll be working during the day.
Okay.
Hey, this is Jason. I'll be in the woods, so.
That's awesome. We'll be sure to. I think Rich Hoffman might be on that show with us. I don't know. I have to double check with him. But everybody else, I'll be sure to contact you regarding that show, July 7th. It's going to be a review of the History Channel's Unidentified series. And I think the last show for that is July 5th. Thank you, everybody, for having taken the time to be with us on the show today. We really appreciate
everybody. Thanks so
time.
much. Thanks so much. It was a great show. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, and we're going to wrap up here. Join us. We're going to have a little update on the Admiral Wilson documents at some point this week with some more information regarding that. And good night, everybody, and have a great week. And enjoy your holiday if we don't talk to you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.